The morning was quiet in Thomas Jefferson Santos' modest neighborhood, the kind of stillness that wraps a small town in a blanket of routine. At 45, Thomas stood at his kitchen sink, his hands submerged in soapy water, scrubbing dishes with a rhythm that mirrored his steady heartbeat. Outside, the world was about to shift. A low, guttural roar sliced through the silence. A black helicopter descending like a storm cloud, its propellers churning the air with relentless force. Neighbors froze mid-step, their eyes wide, as the sleek machine landed squarely in front of Thomas's weathered gate. Two figures emerged, a tall man in a tailored suit, exuding quiet confidence, and a woman whose elegant poise seemed to command the very ground she walked on. They moved with purpose toward Thomas's door. Thomas dried his hands on a worn dish towel, his movements slow, deliberate. A faint smile curved his lips, as if he'd been expecting this moment for decades. His heart stirred with a quiet certainty, a whisper of destiny unfolding. 20 years ago, he was a different man, a 25-year-old waiter at the Golden Fork, a fine dining restaurant where wealthy patrons barely glanced at him. Their orders barked without eye contact. Back then, Thomas was a man stretched thin, juggling morning janitorial shifts and late-night table service to care for his ailing mother, Ruth. Her diabetes had stolen her strength, but never her spirit, and Thomas poured every ounce of his soul into keeping her alive. It was a biting December night when everything changed. Two children, Eli, a wiry 10-year-old with haunted eyes, and Nina, an 8-year-old girl clutching a tattered scarf, appeared at the restaurant's back door. Their thin frames shivered in the cold, their faces etched with hunger and loss. Orphans, Thomas later learned, their parents taken by a car accident, leaving them to survive on the streets. Something in their desperate gazes pierced Thomas's heart, cracking open a well of compassion he didn't know he had. Night after night, he slipped them scraps of food, warm bread, half-eaten steaks, anything he could smuggle from the kitchen. Each act felt like a rebellion against a world that had turned its back on them. But rebellion came at a cost. 3 weeks later, Robert Manning, the restaurant's manager, a 50-year-old man with a sharp tongue and sharper prejudices, caught Thomas. His voice boomed through the kitchen, laced with venom. "You think this is a charity kitchen, boy? You're nothing but a clueless black waiter, stealing food for bums." The words stung like a whip, each syllable dripping with disdain. Thomas was fired on the spot, his colleagues' eyes averted in shame or fear. He left without a word, his pride bruised, but his resolve unbroken. Even as he scraped by with odd jobs, cleaning offices, washing cars, delivering flyers, he kept feeding Eli and Nina with whatever he could spare, selling his own belongings to ensure they didn't go hungry. Until one day, they vanished, whisked away by social services to an orphanage far from his reach. Now, 20 years later, as those two elegant figures approached his door, Thomas's heart thudded with a mix of anticipation and peace. The years had been unkind. Endless jobs, endless slights, endless doors slammed in his face. Yet, beneath the weight of it all, he had carried a secret, one that burned brighter with every insult he endured 20 years earlier. Thomas's life had been a quiet storm of survival. After his firing, Manning didn't stop at taking his job. The manager's vendetta was personal, his prejudice a weapon. He spread lies through the town's network of restaurant owners, branding Thomas a thief who'd stolen food for profit. You know how it is with people like him. Manning sneered over cigars at the private club, his voice thick with self-righteous contempt. Give them a chance, and they'll rob you blind. The blacklist was effective. No decent establishment would hire Thomas. He took what he could get, grueling, low-paying jobs that left his hands calloused and his spirit raw. Each night, he returned to the small apartment he shared with his mother, her frail hands bandaging his wounds, both physical and emotional. "My boy," Ruth whispered, her voice trembling with love and pain. "This town can't see the fire in you. But I do." Ruth was right. What Manning and his cronies never knew was that Thomas wasn't just a waiter. He held a business administration degree from the state university, earned with top honors. He had chosen the Golden Fork's flexible hours to care for his mother, tucking his ambitions away like his diploma, hidden in a drawer. But Eli and Nina had changed him. Their hollow cheeks and quiet gratitude ignited something deep within, a refusal to let the world's cruelty win. One night, carrying a bag of leftovers from a wedding cleanup, Thomas overheard familiar laughter from the private club's porch. Manning, glass in hand, pointed at him. "Look at the thief waiter, scavenging like a dog." The words cut deep, a blade twisting in Thomas's chest. His fists clenched, his blood roaring with the urge to storm across the street and confront them. He imagined pulling his degree from his pocket, shoving it in their smug faces, proving he was more than their slurs. But then he thought of Eli and Nina, waiting in a cold alley, their small hands outstretched. He exhaled, the anger settling into something colder, sharper, resolve. He adjusted the bag and walked on, their laughter echoing behind him. They mistook his silence for defeat. They were wrong. That night, after feeding the children, Thomas sat in the dim light of his apartment, his mother asleep across the room. He opened an old notebook, his hands steady despite the fire in his chest. He began writing names, dates, snippets of conversations he'd overheard at the Golden Fork. As a waiter, he'd been invisible, a shadow moving through a world of privilege. But shadows hear things. Tax schemes whispered over steak dinners. Racist remarks tossed casually, as if he were deaf. One day, he murmured, his voice low but fierce, "You'll learn you underestimated the wrong man." When Eli and Nina disappeared, taken to an orphanage in another state, Thomas's heart broke anew. He searched for them, only to be turned away at the gates. "No family, no rights," the guard said coldly. The injustice burned, but it also clarified his purpose. Dreams of justice weren't enough. He had to forge it himself. For 2 years, while Manning basked in his triumph, Thomas worked tirelessly. By day, he cleaned offices, delivered flyers, scrubbed floors. By night, he transformed his pain into a plan. His notebook grew into spreadsheets, meticulously documenting Manning's empire of deceit, ghost employees, inflated contracts, hidden accounts. Ruth's death, on a rain-soaked Tuesday, was the final blow. She died holding his hand in a public hospital bed after a 6-hour wait for care. "Don't let anger consume you, Thomas," she whispered, her voice fading. "Use this pain to build." Her words became his mantra. Her love is fueled. Her funeral. Thomas met Dr. Marcus Chun, a tax lawyer, an old friend of Ruth's. Chun, a son of Chinese immigrants, understood the sting of prejudice. When Thomas shared his notebook, Chun's eyes widened. "This is dynamite," he said, flipping through pages of damning evidence. "You've got 2 paths. Hand this to the IRS and pray they act, or we build a case so airtight they can't ignore it." Thomas chose the latter. Manning, meanwhile, was riding high. His restaurants multiplied, his wealth ballooned, his arrogance unchecked. "That thief waiter's a janitor now," he chuckled at a business lunch, oblivious that Thomas now cleaned the building housing his accounting office. There, Thomas photographed documents, copied spreadsheets, recorded conversations through thin walls. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the foundation of his justice. Chun marveled at Thomas's precision. "You're a born investigator," he said, organizing files. Thomas's reply was quiet but steely. "I had good teachers and better motivation." The tipping point came when Manning planned a massive expansion, a chain of restaurants backed by international investors. "Now or never," Chun said, his voice urgent. Thomas nodded, his mother's words echoing in his mind. He wasn't the broken waiter Manning had tried to destroy. He was a strategist, forged in the fires of humiliation, ready to strike. The unraveling began on a crisp March morning. Manning's accountant called, panic in his voice. "The IRS is here. They've got documents, spreadsheets, payments, a Cayman Islands account." Manning's confidence cracked, his Italian tie suddenly too tight. "Routine," he stammered, but his gut knew better. 2 days later, Journalists stormed his office, armed with questions about slave labor and tax evasion. A German investor, Herr Schmidt, fixed him with a cold stare. "We don't do business with liars, Manning." The next day's newspaper was merciless. Food empire built on exploitation. Photos, documents, and a recording of Manning's voice. "Negroes have to know their place," sealed his fate. The city gasped. Manning's world crumbled in a desperate call. Thomas's voice came through the line, calm and cutting. "Remember me? The waiter you fired for feeding orphans?" Manning's face drained of color. "You thought I was nothing," Thomas continued. "But I was listening. I was watching. Every document, every word. You handed me your ruin." Manning begged, offered money, but Thomas's laugh was soft, final. "I don't want your money. I already have what I need, Justice." By evening, Manning's empire was in ashes. Investors fled, accounts froze, employees sued. Alone in his office, he stared at the chaos below. Cameras, protests, his name in ruins. Across town, Thomas watched the news, his mother's voice in his heart. "You'd be proud, Mama," he whispered. 6 months later, Thomas's auditing firm, co-founded with Chun, thrived in a penthouse office. His work exposing corporate discrimination made him a legend, his story a case study in business schools. Manning, bankrupt and disgraced, managed a gas station, his former allies shunning him. The world saw him for what he was, a man undone by his own prejudice. On a sunny Thursday, the helicopter arrived. Thomas's heart leapt as Eli and Nina stepped into his office, their faces radiant with purpose. Eli, now a restaurateur employing the vulnerable, and Nina, a human rights lawyer, had never forgotten him. "We knew it was you," Nina said, showing him news clippings. "The man who fed us brought down an empire." Eli handed him a yellowed drawing, a figure shielding 2 children from a storm, now framed with love. Tears welled in Thomas's eyes as they proposed a foundation to help at-risk children, blending kindness with opportunity. That afternoon, as they planned, Thomas looked out over the city. Manning was out there, a shadow of his former self, but Thomas felt no anger, only peace. His mother's words had guided him. Turn pain into building. 2 years later, the Santos Lanina Foundation was a beacon of hope, transforming lives across the country. Thomas, once the invisible waiter, was now a symbol of justice, his story proof that resilience and integrity could topple empires. On national television, he spoke simply, "Revenge destroys, justice builds." Manning tried to break me, but he only made me stronger. As the camera lingered on his serene smile, Thomas knew the truth. Every child saved, every life uplifted, was a victory over the Mannings of the world. His heart, once heavy with pain, now soared with purpose. Success, he realized, was the loudest response to every insult he'd ever endured.